Now, obviously, the public sector fleet electrification presents slightly different challenges, not that dissimilar, but different challenges to commercial organisations. So, Caroline, you might just bring us through, first of all, what you're trying to do, what sort of timeline is involved, and what challenges you're facing.
Yeah, thanks, Geraldine. So maybe to focus a little bit, first of all, Wexford County Council, we're a local authority. We have close to 1,000 employees. We deliver hundreds of different services on a daily basis. We run fire service, we operate libraries, we also do economic development, and also then road infrastructure is a big part of what we do. So I suppose the local authority sector is now charged with leading out on local climate action plans, and we're going to move into a really formal planning process next year. We've had adaptation and mitigation plans in place since 2019, and obviously in terms of our public sector obligations, we're required to reduce our energy efficiency by up to 50% by 2030, and our greenhouse gas emissions by 51%. As of today, we're ahead of our glide path of 30%, which was our obligation for last year. We're currently at 42% on the baseline, so that's a really good energy efficiency activity to date. There is a bit of a COVID bump in that, which will probably rectify next year, or this year. And in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, we're probably about 20-25% down. So we have an awful lot of work still to do. So to focus, I suppose, on the organisation in terms of our kind of consumption and the work that we do maybe in transport, we have 5 significant energy users across the organisation. We have a couple of swimming pools. We have a very large county hall. Public lighting is another big feature, and that's about maybe 20%. And then 43% of our kind of energy and that greenhouse gas is from transport. We have a fleet that's 281 vehicles currently, and of that they range from sort of forklift trucks to small vans up to the really heavy goods vehicles and very specialist road machinery, and everything in between. My colleague Hugh Russell, I have to call him out, he's sitting here in the audience. He's actually our transport fleet manager, and I suppose he's the person who's been really leading out on a lot of this area for the last number of years. My role as director is to kind of give that oversight. So I suppose around the transport piece in particular, we've been on, I suppose, a journey to improve our management and oversight for a long number of years. He was probably working on that for about 10 years. We now have complete centralised operation of our diesel and consumption and complete clarity and telemetrics on all our vehicles. So we have a lot of, I suppose, oversight and clarity on where our vehicles are, what they're doing, how they operate. And that's really, I suppose, in terms of gearing us up to be able to report on our carbon emissions going forward. In terms of then, I suppose, the electric vehicle piece, we started in 2019. We purchased 4 used electric vehicles, and we purchased them at the time without having a home for them. So we didn't know exactly where they were going to be used, but it was really about trying to take that step on that ladder to decarbonise our transport and just really experiment, see what was going to work. We've led a very kind of voluntary approach, so the idea has been to let staff use them and take them out for periods of time without having them to kind of charge them into their section or pay for them on an ongoing basis and make that big commitment. And I suppose that's worked really well for us. At the moment, we have 10 vans in operation, 3 forklift lift trucks, and we have a couple more vans on order, the larger vans. We estimate that we will top out at about 15% of our fleet in terms of what's currently on the market around electric vehicles, and in terms of the kind of profile of what we need. As the market changes and as more, I suppose, vehicle variety comes online, we may be able to extend that, but about 40 units is probably where we're looking at. I suppose one of the ways we've managed to do that is by trying to take the low-hanging fruit. So I suppose we're swapping out and undertaking EV assessments when we're doing vehicle replacements, and then we take into account the mileage, the load, the size, and we only tend to replace out where we can do and carry out the duties on a full day without the need to charge during the day. We're obviously in a highly unionised environment, and if we make a lot of changes to work practices, we're going to have to engage in that process, and that's fine, we'll do that, but I suppose we first need to be able to kind of push those boundaries, learn a little bit, let our staff and our teams understand and see what the EV opportunities are. So I think maybe as we move on, we have about that sort of 15 maybe units at the moment. The next group, the next 10, may be more challenging in terms of that, but we still would have an ambition that we could get around the 15%. So I suppose voluntary buying has been a really big part of what we've been doing and how we've been leading out. And in talking to Hugh, anyone who's taken the vehicles have tended to opt for them, and they've been really happy with them. And I suppose there's loads of other benefits to it in terms of even a more comfortable drive. It's quieter. There's not the same maybe driver stress that you normally get with maybe and another vehicle. So overall, it's been quite successful for the vehicles we have changed. Is that enough for a minute to give you a bit of an oversight?
We'll come back to some of the challenges in a few minutes. Now, Michael, you're coming from inland fisheries, so just tell us a bit about the kind of vehicles you need, the routes they do, and sort of your plans.
Sure, Geraldine. So I suppose for IFI this is particularly challenging because the nature of our business, we conserve and protect Ireland's fisheries. And as part of that, you have to be responsive to pollution call-outs or issues around protection or poaching. So it's not really a case of being able to plan around predefined routes or anything like that. So really we have to look at it from the point of view of what type of electric vehicles maximise our utility. And for us, we've learned quite quickly. I mean, back in 2019, we dipped our toes in the water and we bought some Kona crossovers, and they went down very well. But at the same time, we've learned buying vans and things like that, that if you buy something that has a fairly basic range, I can say from our honest experience, if staff feel that there's a bad reputation or the vehicle isn't going to do what they need it to do, it causes a lot of damage. So the first thing I would say to anyone who's looking at this for the first time, don't skimp on your electric vehicles, invest in them, look for ones that have quality and an excellent range, and that's half the battle. Once you start kind of winning the hearts and minds that way, the whole thing becomes a lot easier.
It's interesting because James from DPD said exactly the same thing, that if there's an issue with an electric vehicle, it gathers pace, like everybody in the company knows. Whereas I'm sure people have had issues with diesel vans in the past, but it doesn't matter. But people do seem to think, oh, I told you they weren't, there was some issue with them. It seems to me, though, talking to both of you, that the issue is more the supply of vans and the type of vehicles that are available at the moment in the sort of commercial sector, rather than its people. Like the people want to change, they can understand the whole sustainability drive, but you're limited by what's actually just available to buy.
I think there's a couple of limitations there. It's really a combination of the whole supply chain issue. We ordered a lot of electric vans last October, and we're still waiting on 5 of those vans to be delivered, and I'm sure lots of people have experienced that themselves. But also the infrastructure. So we've gone down the road this year of installing a lot of charge points at our bases. So by the end of the year now, we'll have 32 charge points at bases. So staff know that when they're finished a shift, they can go straight into the base, connect the vehicle and have it charging overnight and ready to go for the next day. Whereas before that, there was concerns around the availability of the public charging infrastructure, but also if there was issues with it, if there was a unit down, or we've noticed more recently, perhaps in the last 18 months, the number of members of the public who've invested in an EV themselves. We find that when we go to a charger, when you look at the app, it's free, but by the time you get there, it's charging. So these are all these challenges that we were experiencing, and definitely we found by installing them at base, and we're now kind of looking at policy around potentially having home chargers and see if that could work in certain circumstances, depending on the nature of the work and the location, and that it could be a very viable option for ourselves as well. And we've been lucky in certain situations where with the orientation of buildings, we've been able to install PV panels which give us an integrated system. So some of the cost is reduced there as well by having the free energy generated through the PV.
And Caroline, how willing have you found people to embark on driving an EV, or have they, has there been a knowledge gap there in terms of, do they think it was going to cause them much more stress, and was it going to take longer, or what were the sort of initial feelings that people had when you introduced the idea?
I think the way we did it sort of addressed some of that. So by taking in those sort of extra vehicles that didn't have a home initially. So the idea was that any staff member that had a need for a vehicle could take that out and test it. And that kind of gave people a real sense of what it was like. We also had some vehicles at County Hall that any staff member could use. So it's just about trying to educate people a little bit. I suppose the market has really changed. As kind of Michael is saying, there's been a huge increase in kind of regular people now EV purchasing. And that all changes the discussion. So when people are out, restaurants or they're meeting their family, someone else has bought an EV, so it's not so unusual. And that pace has been quite rapid in the last few years. We've struggled as well with the infrastructure piece. So we've installed some of our own chargers, and we have some public chargers in some of our public buildings. But that's not without its challenges. That whole public infrastructure piece and how that's going to be let out, and the speed and pace we need that to happen is really, really challenging, I think, for us in terms of that electric vehicle piece. The supply generally, I know we've ordered kind of a new van that sort of wasn't on the market, say 6 or 8 months ago, which allowed us now to extend to 1 or 2 of our other sections. But in general, because of the approach that we've taken, we haven't sort of met that resistance. And anyone who has taken the EVs, once they're matched with their mileage, their load, their work, it works really, really well. But we haven't grasped the nettle in terms of the change of work practices with the charging, but we just haven't done that piece yet. And I think in terms of the rest of our fleet, what we're really looking at is something like the HV oil, the vegetable oil transition that will have to probably play a big part of what we do. I think generally just around this area, our language, our education, our kind of knowledge of what's out there is quite limited. We're all learning at such a pace at this point, and some of the steps we take won't be right. But I think public sector, that's part of the job that we have, is to try and get out there and push those boundaries and make those mistakes so other people can learn from it. That is part of that role, that we have to take a bit of a leadership space in it. But it is quite difficult because the sector is also new. So big challenges ahead. Budgets, I think, will become an issue for some of our larger projects, maybe kind of even the public infrastructure piece, the demand for the chargers. And as we go on, I know you mentioned at-home chargers, benefit in kind and all those kind of things that impact kind of work practices, all have to be kind of thought through as well. So it's a challenging space.
And also in terms of being a public sector body, obviously we have very ambitious climate change targets, and we need to cut emissions. And one of the things that we don't want to do is replace every ICE vehicle with an EV. So what we want to look at is just ways of reducing journeys. And so is there an opportunity there to rethink your fleet and think about what else you could be doing in better ways? And how has that impacted on any of the choices or decisions you've made or kind of future plans?
At the moment, we really haven't got down to that deep dive piece of it, but I suppose some of our guys who are out maybe in our local districts and who take over, our kind of litter picking and all that kind of stuff, some of it would seem on the face of it that it will work well, but in reality, when you kind of look at the job that's involved in it, I'm not sure we can kind of put them on bikes or put them on scooters or put them walking. So the need for the van sort of has to be established, and there's probably a small number that we have that we have over the number of vehicles. So I suppose that's more about the efficiency and how we share vehicles more. I think that's part of it. But also that we won't be able to change all our vehicles to EV. And I suppose the hydrogenated vegetable oil piece is a really important piece for us to try drive on those reduction of carbon emissions. We will need to invest in that, I think, to make that viable. There's no other way to change these large specialist vehicles that we have. The market is never going to supply them. They're just such a small portion of kind of what's needed globally. So commercial will go over. Will go for the the commercially viable aspects. Some of these big vehicles won't be like that. So we have to look at other ways. But EV is part of that journey and part of that overall package, I would think. Michael,
how feasible is it for you? Obviously,
yeah, it's very interesting, and it's a very challenging situation. Like, we find ourselves in a space where 70% of our carbon production is through fleet. So in order to meet the 51% reduction by 2030, we have to focus heavily on the fleet to mitigate that carbon output. And what we found is using telematics has helped us an awful lot in making decisions and redirecting the use of vehicles. So, for example, the vehicles that were bought originally in 2019 were allocated to a certain business section, and we found through telematics that actually their usage of the vehicles is lower than we expected. So in terms of maximising the utility there and reducing carbon, we're looking at reallocating those vehicles somewhere else and giving them existing diesel vehicles that we have, because we know they're going to be used less. So we're trying to maximise the usage of the electric vehicles as much as possible.
Yeah, no, it's a big challenge, definitely. And in terms of buy-in from your staff, I mean, unlike, I suppose, a commercial organisation where you can explain that that's part of a sustainable policy or whatever, I suppose public sector are almost being forced to make these cuts. They have no choices. Does that make it more difficult to try and package it to the staff? And I mean, I know what you were saying about the vehicles, you allow them to, but I mean, it's a big ask for them, and there isn't really it's not consultation, it has to be done. So does that make it more difficult, or just a different way of approaching it?
A different way of approaching it. Anyone sort of in public sector, you're in it because you know what the game is, and these obligations and these requirements are sort of, they get dictated by the government of the day. But this piece, I suppose, there's a much wider responsibility for all of us as humans, never mind even as employees or even public sector piece, that we all have to take responsibility. In Wexford, we had severe flooding Christmas Day. We had hailstones the size of golf balls in the middle of August, and we just had a big flooding event and a mini tornado last week as well. So we're seeing really significant, I suppose, weather events that we wouldn't have seen before. And it's about trying to get that message through to people that, we really have to sort of make these changes if we want to really make an impact on that climate piece. But at the same time, when it comes down to the individual, it is about how they work, what they do, and their work practices. So we have to be respectful of the fact that we have, a unionised environment. But I would actually be in favour of that structure because it makes it much easier to get agreement. If we didn't have those structures and we didn't have those ways of discussing and making changes, it would be really, really difficult to do. So there's an opportunity there. And I would say in general, people, staff, employees, we all want to do the right thing most of the time. So you're pushing a bit of an open door. The trick is to make it involve people and to kind of get their buy-in early and try and address the problems that they're going to meet as well, such as the availability of chargers, how that's going to work in terms of their day, what does that mean, is it going to make their job more difficult, and as long as we kind of address those things in a kind of a meaningful way, I think that we can certainly achieve it.
So consultation is key, though. That seems to be the message. You have to bring them aboard. You can't impose these things.
Yeah, I'd be fully in favour of consultation. I mean, look, the targets exist as figures, as on kind of a global target. But our job then is to make that work in practice. And we have hundreds of services. We have nearly 1,000 staff, and they all do very different things. So, you guys going out in the middle of the night. No point saying, well, I can't go out because my van is in charge. We are a support for, we do blue light services, we're also support for blue light services, so we have to be mindful of what our work is and our responsibility to our citizens, but also then try and make it work for our staff as well. So consultation really is key. And I think the point Michael made, the telematics piece, and Hugh is the expert on this now, not me, but that level of insight really gives you a lot of education, and I think that's the important piece in terms of trying to match what we do and what vehicles we have where, and really trying to kind of, I suppose, deep dive into that information and try to really transfer that into savings in terms of carbon emissions is that next kind of challenge. But I'd be confident with the work we've done in public lighting, the work we have underway, we're installing a biogas boiler in our new fire station in Ross, and in terms of our transport plans that we have, I'd be confident that we could hopefully meet our 51%. We're kind of 25-ish at the moment, so we've a good long way to go. But I'd be confident we can get there if we plan right and we get in early and do those kind of pathfinder projects as well.
And get people on board from the beginning. And get people
on board, yeah. I should say we have quite a wide climate team in our organisation. So we have obviously a lot of sections, and that's led out through environment and climate change, which is one of my functions. I do emergency services, I do housing, and I do community libraries and arts as well. So I have a really wide remit in terms of public engagement. So we have a really wide climate team, which sometimes can feel a little bit too onerous. But actually the value is in terms of learning. So, we've done staff trips to see our NZEP housing. We've gone to look at some of our coastal erosion projects that we have active in Rosslare Strand and in Kilmore. And it's just about educating the workforce in general around this to kind of get that buy-in and get that behaviour change and just educate all of us in terms of what those challenges are.
Would you say the same thing, Michael, just getting people involved and getting consensus from the beginning?
Absolutely. I mean, in my experience, when we've delivered webinars when changes were afoot, getting in early, giving people information. Once they're informed, they feel like they can participate. It wasn't a thing like, okay, it is policy and it's a target we have to meet. However, you're having conversations around how you're going to go about this and explaining that we are putting in charging points at bases. We are buying this particular type of vehicle. This is what this vehicle can do. So, for example, within Fisheries in Ireland, it operates on a regional district basis. So we would have had maps for a particular vehicle, and it would show, you know, in reality what that vehicle could do, what ground it could cover in their area. And once you kind of alleviate those fears, the range anxiety and things like that, people are kind of more willing to come on board, and there's less resistance. Now, the other thing I would say is you have to be very honest. You have to say that, you know, we don't have an electric vehicle that's going to solve every problem. We have big 4x4s that tow heavy boats and stuff like that. We don't have a solution for that at the moment. But certainly when those opportunities arise, that's the direction we're going.
So it's managing expectations as well as everything
I think
else.
so, yeah. And giving people a chance to air their views. One of the things we done on the webinar, which was very useful, was we actually brought on board some of the staff who use the Konas and have experience of a couple of years of electric driving. And you know, hearing it from the horse's mouth, from the person who's driving that vehicle every day, also helps to give people confidence that maybe, you know, I'm in a similar role, this could work for me as well.
Definitely, these are things that I suppose fleet managers can learn, but also the general public could do with as well. Because a lot of what I think is interesting is the idea of telematics, because a lot of people overestimate how long they drive for and how much driving they do, and they spend a lot of time in traffic and they think they're actually covering huge distance, but they're not. And that's why, you know, most EV ranges, I know it's not the same for, you know, for commercial fleets or whatever, will be perfectly suitable for, you know, your average driver, but people just don't see that. So
guilty of that myself. So, you know, that notion that I can't buy an EV because I want to get to Dublin and back in the day, but the reality is I come to Dublin maybe twice a month, so that's not really practical. I'm in and out to work much more frequently and around the county much more frequently. So yeah, it just, again, that's an education piece, I think that's there. Just one trick in terms of the work that Hugh has done in when we're replacing our vehicles, when you're looking at the overall mileage, and if the van we're bringing in, so we have a few Renaults and Citroens and a few different bits, if they do say maybe a maximum of around 200, but the range of the vehicle is 300, we're leaving around a 30% gap there in terms of comfort. So that really reduces that kind of anxiety range, as they call it. And I suppose one of the big things, we're not tackling some of those, you know, some people might say, well, you're not really engaged in the charging piece and everything, but the important bit is that we introduce it and we have good wins and we get buy-in and we sort of win the hearts and minds, and we show that this can actually work, and then we edge in then to the harder piece and we look at that charging, the infrastructure, the breaks in the day, and then if our vehicles can't deliver fully, swapping out vehicles and all those kind of schedules. But in the first instance, it's the low-lying fruit, it's getting in there and getting those wins early.
yeah. Okay, we have a few minutes. If we have any questions from the audience, I can get a microphone. Yeah, anybody? Or you're all anxious to go for your coffee break? It's quite okay. We won't be insulted. No questions. Okay, that's fine. Just very quickly before we leave, if you were to offer one piece of advice to people trying to electrify their fleet, Michael, first for you, what would you say to them?
I'd say two pieces of advice.
Okay.
I'd say engage with your staff, give them as much information as possible, and invest in high quality, reasonably long range in vehicles, just to eliminate that fear.
And Caroline?
A little bit deep dive to telematics, really get into that and understand what it is your fleet does, the mileage, the size, the loads, what your staff do and what they expect, how they work. And then I suppose to dip your toe in, just start, get one, get two, get them in there and get the conversation going in the canteen between staff members and just kind of start the journey.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Caroline. We'll take a short break now till around 3:45 and we'll meet back here then. So thank you.